On the origin of religion, the beginnings of organized religion, it is certain that spirituality existed well before organized religion did. From the moment that humans started burying their dead, we can be sure that they thought about the concept of afterlife and their place within reality, or more precisely the place of consciousness within the continuous nature of time, and the possibility of consciousness existing beyond the physical life. These realizations would have inevitably led to the conclusion that the universe was created, and if it was created, that its creator had set in place a way for consciousness to be eternal. Göbekli Tepe is argued to be the first religious site. This has, however, not been confirmed. Although the site itself is of cultural and astronomical importance, it cannot yet be confirmed as a religious site. The Abrahamic religions, practiced today by well over 2.4 billion people. Both Islam and Christianity have their roots in Judaism and recognize the main Judaic prophets. So where did Judaism come from? Where did its major concepts originate? Who invented the main Abrahamic prayer protocols? Where did its concept of God, 10 Commandments, afterlife and Judgment Day paradise, and a Messiah originate from? Today we will embark on a journey that will enlighten us on the true source of one of the major driving forces in human history: religion. So where did Judaism come from? Without a doubt, Judaism is derived from dynastic Egypt. In fact, the exodus of the Jews from Egypt coincides with Egypt's tumultuous cultural and religious revolutionary era when Queen Tiye and her son Akhenaten unsuccessfully tried to reform Egypt from a polytheistic to a monotheistic society. This occurred in the 14th century BC, when civil unrest and civil war culminated in the rejection of the monotheistic sect and the exodus of its members, the Jews, out of Egypt. The Jews, Egyptians proper, were well versed in all things Egyptians. Their writing was Egyptian, their laws were Egyptians, their antecedents was Egyptian, and so was their religion, as we will see throughout this video. When Akhenaten wrote the first prayer to the one and only God, Aten, he was really venerating and praying to the same sun-god deity of ages old, Amun-Ra. Akhenaten was the first in history to introduce monotheism along with the concept of the sole creator God, a breakaway tradition from the previously established pantheon of gods in ancient Egypt, pantheon that the Greek inherited. All Greek deities were in fact seated in Egypt, and the Greeks themselves attest to that. In the hymn to Aten you will recognize clear motifs and phrases that are still used today in the Lord's Prayer. Here is a passage from the Christian Lord's Prayer: Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Here is a passage from the Lord's Prayer in the Jewish tradition: Our Father, who is in heaven, let your name be sanctified, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And now here is a passage from the hymn to Aten: How manifold it is what thou hast made, they are hidden from the face of man. O sole God, like whom there is no other, thou didst create the world according to thy desire, whilst thou wert alone all men, cattle, and wild beasts, whatever is on earth, and what is on high flying with its wings. 3,300 years on, the same motifs set forth by Akhenaten still live on today. Beyond these themes, the Jews also inherited major cultural practices from this African civilization: circumcision, the use of a lunar calendar writing, and the concept of law and justice. This last one can be clearly seen in the origin of the 10 Commandments which have governed the Abrahamic traditions since its inception. The 10 Commandments and the 42 Laws of Mot. Historians believe that Moses, if he ever existed as a historical figure, would have received the 10 Commandments between the 13th and 6th century BC. Whether he received it or whether it was composed, the opus itself goes into detail about the key principles by which the believer should conduct its life in order to be eligible for paradise or the afterlife. From adultery to theft to respecting one's parents and praying only to the true God, these rules appear in one form or another in the Torah, the Bible, or the Quran. Aside from the written and oral accounts from the Abrahamic traditions, we have one more verifiable source in history that points to the origin of the commandments, and that's the Egyptian mysticism tradition, a rich and very developed religious and cultural system that included a set of rules uncannily similar to the Ten Commandments. And these are the 42 Laws of Ma'at. To realize how similar the Laws of Ma'at are to the Ten Commandments, here are a few. I have not stolen. I have not slain men or women. I have not told lies. I have not cursed. I have not committed adultery. For the Africans in Egypt, these rules were essential to maintain order and harmony in the universe. They first appear in 2600 BC in the Pyramid text, a full 1300 years before the earliest estimates of Moses and the Ten Commandments. Coincidentally, they appear in the same civilization that birthed the sect that was to become Judaism, in which Christianity and Islam are firmly rooted. These Ma'at statements should be read as affirmations more so than commandments. Egyptians believed that they are to be spoken on the Day of Judgment in the Hall of Truth, a test to determine if the soul of the deceased is worthy of the gift of afterlife, an entrance to afterlife, as we shall see, that is identical in procedure and motifs to the entrance in afterlife for those of the Abrahamic tradition. Judgment Day. How to enter the afterlife? Yes, Judgment Day also exists in the older Kemetic tradition. In the African tradition, when one dies, the soul goes to the Hall of Truth, where one can only speak to the truth of their life, and recites the 42 affirmations of Ma'at. The soul of the judged is then weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If it is pure, the soul is then allowed to continue its journey to the afterlife. Failure means the soul is devoured into non-existence. The same powerful procedure exists in all Abrahamic traditions. However, the Africans had been practicing the belief thousands of years before the Jews incorporated it into Judaism. It is not a stretch at all to say that the major religions as we know it today are really a continuation of the Kemetic traditions started ages ago. The symbol of the ankh was the source of the Christian cross as we know it today. The use of the cross as a Christian symbol also spread beyond the Roman Empire, and it became particularly important in the Coptic Church in Egypt. The Coptic Church evolved from the ancient Egyptian religion, and it adopted many of the symbols and practices of the Egyptian faith. One of these symbols was the ankh, which was transformed into a Christian. The crux ansata was a cross with a loop at the top similar to the ankh. The crux ansata is still used by the Coptic Church today, and it is an important symbol of the faith. The ankh was an ancient Egyptian symbol of eternal life, which made it particularly appealing to the Coptic Christians in Egypt in the 4th century CE. They adopted the ankh as a symbol of Christ's promise of everlasting life through belief in his sacrifice and resurrection, which is likely the reason why the cross is now used as a symbol of faith in Christianity. Prior to this, early Christians in Rome and other areas often used the fish symbol as a sign of their faith, as the image of the cross was a well-known symbol of execution and not something they would have wanted to associate with their religion. The ankh, with its already established meaning of life, was more easily assimilated into early Christianity, and it became a symbol of the faith. The ankh cross, a combination of the ankh and the cross, is still used by the Coptic Church today. The ankh continues to represent the promise of eternal life via the belief in Jesus Christ. Origins of Christmas and the ancient Egyptian influence. The winter solstice is the shortest day of the year, marking the beginning of winter. Many ancient cultures, including the Egyptians, celebrated the winter solstice as a way to honor the natural cycles of the earth and to give thanks for the return of the sun. In the festival of Nebkal, the ancient Egyptians celebrated the winter solstice with a 12-day festival known as the Feast of the Sun. This festival began on December 21st and lasted until January 1st. It was a time of great celebration and joy, as the Egyptians believed that the sun god Ra was reborn on this day. On December 25th, this day was known as the Feast of the Birth of the Sun, and it was a time of great celebration and rejoicing. The ancient Egyptians believed that the sun god Ra was born on this day and that his rebirth brought new life and hope to the world. They are believed to be able to intercede on behalf of believers and to offer assistance and protection. The veneration of saints and martyrs is an important part of many Christian traditions, and it has been practiced since the early days of the Church. The first Christian martyr, Stephen, is believed to have been stoned to death in Jerusalem in the 1st century CE, and the veneration of martyrs became an important part of Christian devotion from that time on. In the 4th century CE, the Church began to formally recognize certain individuals as saints, and the process of canonization, in which an individual is officially declared a saint by the Church, was established. Today, the veneration of saints and martyrs is an important part of the Catholic, Orthodox, and some Protestant traditions. Monasticism was also rooted in ancient Egyptian traditions. The concept of monasticism has its roots in ancient Egyptian religion, where certain individuals, known as ascetics, sought to live a life of solitude and devotion to the gods. These ascetics lived in isolated locations. The first Christian monastic communities were established in Egypt in the 3rd century CE. These communities were inspired by the examples of the ancient Egyptian ascetics and sought to follow a similar way of life. The most famous of these early monastic communities was founded by Saint Anthony, who is considered to be the father of Christian monasticism. Saint Anthony lived as a hermit in the desert of Egypt in the 4th century CE and is remembered for his austerity and devotion to God. The monastic way of life quickly spread throughout the Christian world and became an important part of the Church. Monastic communities were established in many different locations, and the monastic way of life came to be seen as a way of living that was particularly dedicated to the service of God. Monasticism has played a significant role in the history of Christianity, and many famous Christian saints and scholars have been monks or nuns. Monastic communities continue to exist today, and the monastic way of life is still followed by many Christians who seek a life of solitude and devotion to God. To purify one's self before praying to God, the use of incense in ancient Egypt dates back to at least the Old Kingdom period, which began around 2500 BCE. Incense was used in a variety of different contexts, including in religious rituals as a means of purifying the air and as a way to create a pleasant aroma. In ancient Egyptian religion, incense was believed to have the power to appease the gods and bring good fortune. The use of incense and perfumes in religious ceremonies has a long history dating back to ancient civilizations. In ancient Egypt, incense and perfumes were used in religious rituals as a way to purify the air and create a pleasing aroma. The ancient Egyptians believed that the pleasant scent of incense and perfumes could help to appease the gods and bring good fortune. So why then is much of this not common knowledge? For two main reasons. because these religions and their religious texts are believed to have descended from God. Any proof that they actually existed in earlier forms in ancient Egypt would undermine their claim of absolutism. Secondly, the stark realization that the God being prayed to today originated from a breakaway sect of the Egyptian mysticism system would be wholly rejected. The rejection of that system would be stronger, given that the Kemetic tradition was complete with its pantheon of black gods and goddesses. In whole, this realization would be difficult for many to accept, and yet in this truth lies the liberation of many ills of the world. Would it not be of pure irony and hatred-breaking view that the stock of men, which today is the scorn of humanity, is in fact the origin of divinity, that this same stock is divinity itself, Amun-Ra proper? Till this day, you can find all over Africa the same religious motifs in many cultures. Furthermore, many in Africa are still called Amun, after the all-powerful Amun-Ra, the same Amun to whom we all call at the end of each prayer. And yet they still claim that we are without history. The underpinning of human history passed through the narrow canals of the Nile in Africa, deep in the heart of Central Africa, modern-day Uganda. Its fauna and flora have been immortalized in the Ndu Netcher, the writing of the gods, a family, a pantheon jet black of skin, as it has always been depicted on the temple walls, but bright with knowledge and intentions. Pantheon and knowledge that it gladly shared to the world. Rules, cultures, and practices that have guided the greater part of humanity till today. Make sure to follow us and hit the bell icon so as not to miss future episodes on how those who were thought to be without history birthed civilization itself.